impact evaluation. This is the first module in impact evaluation space. So why are we discussing today impact evaluation? Impact evaluation plays a very significant role in driving accountability, learnings, and evidence-based support for policies, interventions in social and development sector. Now, impact evaluation, when you want to give a theoretical definition, Asian Development Bank says impact evaluation are empirical studies. Empirical studies are studies which you get data from direct observation that quantify the causal effects of interventions on outcomes of interest. Now, when we talk about impact evaluation, we need to understand what are we talking about. When we talk about evidence-based approach, what we are talking here is whatever policies and interventions which you want to take or drive in the social and development sector specifically, what sort of effect they have. Do they really have the effect which is intended? Do they fulfill the mission? So these are some of the questions. It gives a very good learning perspective, because we are able to understand how those policies and what are the basically effect of those policies in the development sector. Now, one way, of course, is to check and measure the difference between the intervention when you are given and the counterfactual. So we'll understand what we mean by counterfactual. It's very important. It's one of the backbone of a lot of studies, specifically in randomized controlled trials, which you call RCTs. Basically, impact evaluation is used in social sciences. Usually, a lot of impact evaluation are long-term oriented. However, you can also have short-term and medium-term impact evaluation. So just to give you an idea, so this is, if you see the graph is just going up, it's number of, studies published annually on that particular subject. So we see how much I had the data for 2015, and we see that it's going and rising in an exponential manner. So what is counterfactual? It is when you're going to be implementing a policy, you want to know how effective that policy had been. So when you want to compare it, you want to see what happened if there was no intervention compared to what would have happened if there was an intervention. So when I'm giving an intervention, and I'm going to, we'll look in detail when we're talking about that, is how have you made that difference? And that is actually the calculation of impact. So this is what I was talking about. Let's say you are measuring an outcome, and you're measuring it over a period of time. And that period of time could be depending on your project. So at YT, an intervention is given. After YT, the change would go to observation. So T+1 would be at the time when you want to observe basically the impact. Output of the intervention is Y1 T+1. If there was no intervention given, the output would be Y0 T+1. Now, impact is the difference between Y1 T+1 minus Y0 T+1, which is what would be the effect if there was no intervention given, which is known as the counterfactual. Now, it's very difficult to measure the counterfactual at the same time as you're observing the results of the intervention. Now, this is why there is something known as RCT, which I talked about, randomized controlled trials, which delivers a mechanism where you can to measure the difference between counterfactual and the observation of the intervention. You also have quasi-experiments. Impact evaluation module goes in tandem in statistics and regression, because those are the tools which you are going to be using. So the concepts of statistics and regression are very important, and other concepts come out as and when it is required. So just to give a fair example, these are some of the questions you could be asking in impact evaluation. A city has built a 4-lane highway between the city center and a suburb. So some of the questions could be, what is the impact of the economic development on the local community? Did building the highway achieve the stated goals laid down in the national policy statement? This is a more broad ranging score. This won't be the direct first question you will ask. There could be like, was there a reduction of carbon emissions due to the increase in the efficiency of the transportation. So this is in terms of priority. Like first, of course, is what was the economic impact, and then you're looking at what is the, in terms of effect on the climate, and third, on an even broader role, that what actually did it go with in tune with the national policy. So when we talk about impact valuation, what are the cycle? So first is basically we strategize. We'll also come to theory of change. We need to have a clear cut objective. Basically, what do we want in the outcome? The outcomes usually are long term. So you have to be as clear as possible. We need to have a timeline and a budget. These are very important things when you start with, because your clear cut objective would define what is your timeline and budget, and these things are going to define what you're going to be doing going forward, how you're going to be planning the project. So clearly communicate your mission to all the actors. There'll be a lot of actors involved, so that you should be absolutely clear on what you want to do. This is the time we're going to be. Second stage is you set up the experiment and intervention. You need to understand the scope of the intervention. Is it going towards the long-term part of your vision, what you want to accomplish, or in the short term or the medium term? So what are these interventions? How are you going to plan out? You set up a monitoring system. You need indicators to look at the outcomes or preconditions, which are smaller outcomes, and then the final outcome. You look at external factors. You need to have a fair understanding of what the political regulatory environment is, because this is going to play a huge role as a driver for what you want to do. You will then have to set up a system. There are multiple actors who are going to be playing the role in impact evaluation cycle. There could be consultants whom you hire from outside who are experts in terms of research. So it depends. The technical part is being done in-house or who's going to be doing it. So you need to have everybody on the same page. Then is the implementation, which requires field visit, collect baseline data. So what we mean by baseline data is the data which you are going to be collecting from the sample or from the group which you want to do an intervention. Ultimately, this is the time which is going to happen. The baseline data is done before you carry out the intervention, experiment, or the policy initiative which you want to undertake. You need to also have a very strong coordination among various actors. It's very important. This is going to be a multi-actor part when you're going to be implementing a project. So last is, of course, you come to analysis and report generation. So you're going to collect the endline data. Basically, endline data will be data on the sample or on the population which we have conducted the intervention, and it has already taken results. So when you collect the data when you had an intended and you want to see what is the result of the intervention, then you do is conduct impact analysis and publish the findings. So here we'll try to understand, as I spoke about, an Endline survey is run after a program's benefit are expected to have materialized. Whatever you wanted to do, whatever the programmer wanted to do or about the intervention, it's already been it's already materialized. And when you want to compare, you compare the outcome which was at the beginning and the end, which was to show what changed during the intervention. So theory of change. Whenever we are talking about intervention, these are basic policy changes, or basically anything which you are going to be doing to get to the objective or the outcome. For example, if you want to eradicate particular disease among children or babies, so you will be going through a free immunization process. It could be camps or door to door. So these are the interventions. Theory of change plays a major part in impact evaluation. Is basically a strategic decision making tool in social sciences to find solutions to complex problems. Now usually it's planned out for long term, and we'll look at it in detail. So it's very good. It'll be great if you read the publication Community Builders Approach to Theory of Change, a practical guide to theory development. So it was written by Andrea Anderson, and it's from the prestigious Aspen Institute. It's one of the leading think tanks and institutes in the development sector. Now, when we talk about theory of change, so what are we talking? So the prime reason part of theory of change is basically you want to deliver an output, and you have to have a pathways to deliver that output. So you take series of steps. It works as a way of backwards mapping. That is, you look at the end result. You look at the end result, how you're going to map it. Once you have the end result, what you want to achieve it, then you can go back and set your objective. So this is very interesting. As we go forward, we'll come to the slide how we particularly achieve this goal. So it could be a process or a product, and it's actually driven in terms of, it's a long-term process, but it could be driven in short phases. It could be short-term, medium-term, and you should have indicators during all this time. So when we talk about assumptions, which plays a very important role, when you look at, you'll have pathways, and we are making a pathway for theory of change to change something in the long term. You'll always have certain assumptions. Once you have an objective, you take certain assumptions. So when you're assuming, what it means that X is going to affect Y, which is like if X, then the Y outcome will happen. Now, one of the fallacies which usually people do is like they say, if not X, then not Y, which is not true. So if, when you're looking at critical reasoning, and this plays a very important role also in aptitude tests, so if X then Y, then the right form is if not Y, then not X. So this is how the assumptions work in. So theory of change. Now, these are the 5 steps of nirvana. I just wanted to bring in the word nirvana because of Kurt Cobain. So I put this in the presentation. Now, when you have theory of change, and this is out of the paper which I talked about, publication. Now, you have to identify the long-term objective, which I spoke about. You have to be very specific on your mission, because this is what is going to define. So the outcome has to be, you're mapping the whole process, looking at basically end result. So you'd have to be very specific with the outcome. It has to be in some ways measurable. Now you have to develop a path to change, and that pathway to change is the most tedious part. This is where you're going to be sitting with multiple teams and you're going to be talking a lot. So basically you have to have backwards mapping, which is what I spoke about. Once you have your basically objective, that's when you'll map the whole process. You're going to link all the steps for a final outcome. So there'll be series of steps, they'll be all interlinked together, and you have to be very clear on what you're really doing here. Once you have done that, you're going to operationalize your outcome. This is where your implementation works comes in. You will have checks and balances for preconditions. Preconditions are also known as outcomes. So to get a final outcome, we'll have a series of smaller short-term outcomes and then intermediate outcomes. So those are known as preconditions, and you should have indicators. How are you going to map them? How are you going to make sure that you're actually on the right track? So you'll have indicators to map your progress. That's when you'll then come out with interventions. And when you're coming out with interventions, these are the facts which are going to help you to come out whether the intervention is actually meeting the short-term goal. And you have to be very fixed and be very fixed on what you want to do. You need not be tangential and try to, go after results which are not aligned towards what you really want to do. The idea is to have all the preconditions which are required to meet the end objective and stick to that. You need not then divert, even if there are other effects of what interventions you are doing. So you have to be very clear and cut in terms of preconditions. You have this precondition set, and then you stick to those preconditions. And whenever you're making an assumptions, which is articulate assumptions, it has to be evidence-based research from academics or something which can be proven. So there's a absolute causality which can be given back with a proof. And it's always good to always define each precondition. You'll have those assumptions for each precondition, each small outcomes. So this is the theory of change, some of the steps. Now we'll look at the pathway of change outcome, which I spoke about. It's backwards. You look at the final outcome, what in the long-term outcome, what you want to achieve. Then you go back to the assumptions, and then when you have these assumptions, you have these preconditions, And then you have these interventions. So these are small interventions. The shaded lines are interventions which you're going to carry out to meet preconditions or outcomes. This one outcome gets linked to another, and that's how the change continues. Now the whole process is an intervention, and even those smaller the lines, the dashed lines which I'm talking, these are also interventions. So the intervention is the whole experiment which you're doing or the whole project, as well as the small interventions which you do to get those outcomes which are linked to the final outcome. Now, for all, you're actually coordinating with all the actors, and all these things are driven by the drivers. The drivers could be I talked about the political condition, could be the various actors, how they are motivating, it could be the regulatory environment. And you're actually working among a multiple set of actors. And here the coordination is very important. So this leads finally to the long-term objective which you want to see go through pathways of change. So when we talk about impact evaluation, what are we talking? One is like it's divided into two, experimental and non-experimental. So experimental, whenever we're talking about randomized controlled trials. So when you're talking about randomized controlled trials, here these are basically experiments which are come under experimental evaluation, and here the things are done right before the experiment. Now when you're talking about non-experimental, a lot of settings are done after the experiment. Some of these experiments are natural, so we'll not go into the natural part. We'll be talking a bit about quasi-experimental designs and regression analysis. That's what I was talking about. Regression is very important as we go on. This is one way you will be seeing the effect, the effect of causality of your policies. So when you're talking about quasi-experiment designs, these are the three which Asian Development Bank has listed, which are important, which is difference in differences, propensity score matching, regression, discontinuity design. So as we go forward, this is going to come very late in the statistics, and which is then going to become regression analysis or impact evaluation module. This will come at a much later date. We'll go through the basics first. We'll go through a lot of statistics, inference of data before we come in to some of these parameters. So this is going to come at a later date. So just to give a last brief effect of what is randomized controlled trials, we talked a lot about it. I'm not going to be discussing this in depth in the module. It's not going to be an in-depth part of the module. However, it's always good to have a fair bit of understanding what RCTs are. It is known as RCTs, and you could always refer to them as RCTs. Basically, you divide it in two very similar groups. One is a treatment group, other is a control group. They are selected through random sampling, which is lottery, or double slit and single slit procedures. There are other examples also, but we'll just keep it to random sampling, double slit, and we'll not go in depth. So the idea is to have a total random sample to remove selection bias. Usually double slit and single slit experiments are good to remove any selection bias. Once you are in these two groups, one group is given an intervention, which is the treatment group. So the treatment group receives the intervention and the control group does not receive the intervention. So let's say if you're giving an intervention and your output you want to see in 1 to 1.5 years. So this is going to give you the data for counterfactual. So this is where the counterfactual data comes in, because one is given a treatment. This is where the intervention is. For example, if you want to see how is the effect of getting higher budgetary controls in schools, whether children are better prepared in education. So one of the groups will be given the intervention and the other group will not be given the intervention. So let's say you need to have a result after 1.5 years. I'm just generalizing the result. So you'll have a result data, which is the Endline data we'll have from here, and you can compare the data from here. So since this group has not been given that intervention, actually RCT started in the medical industry. So when the people are not given, who have not been given the intervention, you get an output here, you get an output result, and you get an output result here. So now you can compare the two. So this result compared with this result gives you what I was talking about, impact, which we saw. So one is a counterfactual and one is with an intervention, and now you have two similar groups going through, to see exactly what effect has the intervention made. A lot of times it was used for medicines when medicine is coming out, a vaccine is going to be coming out. For example, now during the pandemic, we look at trials. So most of these trials are also randomized controlled trials. From my knowledge, you could check it up to give you an understand that what happens to the treatment group which is given the vaccine and what happens to the control group which is not given the vaccine. So when you compare the two, you could know how effective that particular medicine is or a vaccination is, to just give you a fair bit of idea. So this is a very introductory module, and as we go, like I said, this is going to be impact evaluation is totally based on statistics and regression and other analysis. So this is going to be in tandem with the statistics model, which